Welcome, Derek. I'm glad you're here.
Yes,
Hello.
great to be here. Thank you, Shannon, so much. Learned a lot from what you're doing.
Awesome.
Congratulations. Um, Good to see you again, Max. My question is, I'm nearing 50, in a different field. I've been writing since I was 17, but took a little shortcut. Well, sidetrack, I should say. You know, finance, investments, and all that kind of thing. Had wife and kids now. And what do you suggest someone in my position how to get in there? Because I get a feeling it's a young person's game, but I'm not old, but a little
It's
nervous.
not. It's not. Your track is going to be the same as anyone else who's trying to get in right now. And what you have to bet on is because you've worked in another industry, you have some transferable skills there that other people who have not worked outside of this industry have. And because of your age, you have information that other people don't have. So when you're looking, I don't know if you do features or if you do television, but sometimes people are looking for people exactly like you to put into their rooms, right? Because you do have information from that financial job, that job in finances. You do have information because of your age. I actually put up a post a couple of years ago about several TV writers who didn't break in until they were in their 40s and their 50s. So don't be discouraged. Just keep writing. Again, it's all about execution and it's all about networking and getting it on someone's desk. However, lean into those things. Those are the things that make you unique. And those are the things that are going to make other people excited to work with you.
Okay, I guess it's just trying to figure out how to get that flexibility. So I know that eventually I can go to LA, but I don't know I'll have too much flexibility. But you never know.
Yeah. Well, definitely don't think it's a young man's game. You can take that part out. Let that go. I'm relieving you of that burden.
That's good.
It's a good problem to have if and when you get to that point, Derek. If somebody's calling you out for a meeting because they love the pilot that you wrote, you figure it out. I'll just have to figure it out. And if it comes to a place where they're like, you're going to have to live here, obviously family is more important. You have to make a decision. But again, I think it's a good problem to have once you get to that point. Just like Shannon was saying, it's all about writing a great project. It's all about execution, and you're getting there.
And the great thing about TV is TV rooms don't stay open for the entire year. So if you can, you might be able to do a half year in Los Angeles, half year wherever it is that you are. You don't necessarily have to be here the entire time if it's already getting picked up, right? And so, the writers' rooms don't last always. So it's possible.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Hello.
Hi, Emily.
Hey, thanks so much for this. It's been really great. So my question is, I'm really passionate about having diverse characters, especially like visually, or having the beauty of the the human family on screen. And so for one script I'm writing, there's like a lot of different characters, different places, but all from the US, and they're like second or third generation in the US, and many of them are mixed, like for example, like part Tongan, part Caucasian, or like Tongan and white or whatever, or black and whatever else. So how would you write that in the script? Because it's important to me that the casting directors know that these people look differently, even though the show is not about race, but I want it to be in there. So advice for that would be great.
Yeah, you just add it to your description. Some people, when they do their descriptions, they put them in parentheses. Some people separate them with dashes. Some people just use commas, but you just put it in there when you're first introducing us to them. When you give us the capital letters of this is whoever the character is, give us a description and just tell us what their ethnic makeup is. Because if it's important, it should be there. If it's not important, then you don't have to have it there. But if it's important to their experience, it's important to who they are and how they live, then definitely put it in there.
Okay, beautiful.
And I always say that if you're writing a comedy, there should be a slight tone to the way we describe people, just a little bit, just so that it's kind of, because you want the funny moments to live on the page, and sometimes you can add just a little bit of tone in there with the word choice in the scene direction, even with the way we're introducing characters, even if the way you're introducing or describing a location, instead of just diner, maybe it's shitty diner, or it adds a little tone and feeling in there. I don't know if you're trying to write a comedy. If you're not writing a comedy and it's a drama, it's something serious, or it's a horror movie, you don't want to make it funny because it's not necessary. But yeah, you can add tone in there. It's a good question because, I always say, be pithy with your word choice as much as you can. Don't go give me 3 lines down on exactly what this person looks like. Be quick with it. Give me a brief, reference. But if there is something specific like that, then you're just going to have to put it in there.
Yeah. And I think actually, to your point, I think going back to talking about voice, however you're describing your character should be in the tone of that screenplay. That's where most of my tone and most of my voice comes out in the way that I describe my characters and in the way that I describe the set. So I wouldn't say interior shitty diner, but I would say interior diner. It's shitty, guys. It's really shitty. And that would be how you hear my voice and you get to also know what this place looks like. So I'm glad that you mentioned using your voice and staying within the tone and how you describe them. Because if it is a drama, there are particular words that you can use in your description that already help me to feel the tone of the film. Same thing if it's horror or, whatever it is.
And this is why, and thanks, Emily, and we'll go in through as many of these questions as we can here. But this is why, and it sounds so ridiculously simple, but why reading is so important. My dad grilled me when I was a kid you have to be reading, you have to read. And it's for so many reasons, and in specific response to this particular question is so that you learn words. It's a ridiculous thing to say, but we have to have that recall. We have to be able to know, what word would I choose in that? We have to have a vocabulary that's bigger than other people. We just do.
Yeah.
We have to be wordsmiths.
And even in that, don't just be someone who uses a thesaurus and have those word choices take us out of the tone or feel forced. Like, I'm a person who lives in a thesaurus, right? Because I read and I watch so much stuff, and half the time, just like we couldn't think of Anna Paquin, it's like, what's the word? Right. What's the word? Right. So I go to my thesaurus and I put in the word that I think I'm looking for until I get to the word that I need. But sometimes it's really obvious when someone has gone through their thesaurus and just chose the most ridiculous word to use, and that kind of pulls you out of the read instead of informing you more about what's going on in that scene.
Yeah. And reading some of the masters, some of the people who are just so naturally gifted at word choice, regardless of the genre, especially in the novel world. Boy, some of these people are just so gifted, and it just makes you well up with tears of how they just have a natural ability that, in a lot of ways, some of these people, they just had it. Like, it's kind of looking at a professional athlete. And I say it all the time because I think it's so funny, but if you look at an offensive lineman on a football team, I can't grow my head that big. The guy was born with that. Like, there's nothing I can do to be an offensive lineman. And sometimes there are people like that in the arts who are just that naturally gifted. Yeah. Arts are much different than athletics. You can learn this craft and you can learn sports, but sometimes when you get into the Division I professional level, there's just nothing you can do. It's different in the arts. All right, let's go through. Christy Daniels, I'll just kind of start from the top here. We'll get through as many as we can. If you feel someone's work is really beyond hope of going anywhere, think Springtime Hitler. Would you tell the writer the bad news? Or would you encourage them to keep rewriting until it works? It's a really good question. Do you often tell a writer, don't work on this?
No. Well, just so I understand the question, if I know that a writer has been rewriting the same thing for years, then yes, the answer is just leave it alone because you're trying to force it. It doesn't mean that there's not a story there, but you haven't crafted. And because I'm so big on having confidence while you're writing, you are just ruining your self-esteem, because looking at that page and not being able to type something just messes with your mind and it messes with your creativity. So at some point, just let it go, sit it to the side. And if you feel motivated at some other point in the future, come back to it. So that's one thing. As far as someone just not being a good writer, I don't necessarily say that because I find that to be very subjective. And like I said earlier, my job is to be objective. So what I do is I show them where they're lacking execution and I inform them what they can do to execute it better. And I'll even give an example without saying that this is what you should do because I said you should do it, but just trying to get their wheels turning so they can understand how to fix the problem themselves. But because, like you just said, this is something that can be taught, some people just need you to tell them exactly what the problem is. I will do as much as highlight something from copy something from someone's script, put it in the notes and say, see this right here. This is not doing the thing that you think that it's doing. What it's doing is making me feel X. I understand that you want it to make me feel Y. This is why it's not, right? So that they can put those two things together so they can start to solve the problems. Because again, I look at the screenplay like a math problem. So I'm like, here's the problem, here's how you solve it. And it's going to be up to them to make that decision whether writing is for them. So one of the conversations that I do have with some of my clients, because I have a few clients who contact me and the first thing they say is, I'm not a writer, but I just want to write this. And I always say to them, you know that there are other positions within this industry that allow you to be creative and you don't have to write. But I think a lot of people don't know what those positions are, and they're thinking the only way that I can be creative in Hollywood is to be a writer. Or they're thinking the only way I can have creative control is to be the writer, which is just, that's the last person who could see kind of creative control. So some of these people are idea people, but they're trying to force themselves into writers. And it's like, no, you can be a creative producer. You can be the person who comes up with the ideas and hires the writers to write, and then you guys go off and try to pitch and sell. So I usually start to try to look for their strengths to say, this is the thing that you're good at. The other thing is I always ask, what's the end goal? Because some people are just writing their babies. They have no intentions of being a professional writer. They just got to get this baby made. There are other people who want to make it themselves. They have no intention of doing the Hollywood way. So really it doesn't matter what they write because they're doing it themselves and they just want to show it to their parents and say, look what I did. And then there's another group of people who say, no, I'm trying to be a professional writer, as in this is how I feed my family. Well, okay. Knowing which direction you're trying to go in, now I get to work with you so you can go that direction, which may mean it could be the worst script ever. But if you're happy with it and you're just going to make it yourself and show it to your family, then let's get it to a place where you're happy with it.
Right. Yeah. I think the only time I've mentioned the possibility to a writer that maybe this isn't the project to work on is when asking the question, are you the best person to write this project? If a man is writing a very female-oriented story, I applaud you for trying to do that, but you don't know what it's like to be a woman. So why? This is, there are stories that men just wouldn't understand. So are you really the best person to write that? And so it's really more of a question that I have to ask as opposed to just saying, we're as consultants, we're not magicians. We can't guarantee that if you work with us, the script's going to be great, or that you're going to have a career, or that you're going to be amazing, but you're probably going to be a little better than you were when you started. Yeah. That's really the only thing we can guarantee.
My job is all about execution. I want to get you to a place where if you give your screenplay to someone else, you feel good about it. You feel like it is a good representation of who you are as a writer and what it is that you write. Because we're all just going to continue to grow. I mean, even Shonda Rhimes looks at something that she wrote a decade ago and cringes. You know what I'm saying? We're all growing. So it's really just about what it is that they want, and I help them to get there. But there are no promises about where the screenplay will take you because it's a subjective industry. We just don't know.
Hey guys.
Hi.
Hey Jay, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for having these. This has been great, even though it's virtual and we don't get to hang out. We get to see everybody and talk about it. I appreciate it.
Sure.
So yeah, my question is regard to Screenplay Contest, and I wrote kind of a longer question. Last year I decided to enter a few, and I was fortunate to be selected as a finalist or corner finalist in some places. Made the top 25. I was very fortunate in a couple different genre categories for creative screenwriting, unique voices. I even made the top 10. Anyway, in a different contest, and honorable mention, another one. I'm trying to figure out how do I capitalize on that? Do contests, is it something, that I can keep building on, or what's the next best step, please? And thank you for your time.
Yeah, so here's my honest answer. You have to know what you're looking for when you go in, and then look at the rules, look at the awards section and see if they're offering the thing that you need. So for example, most writers are looking for access. However, 90% of the competitions don't promise you access. So if they don't promise you access, then you're not going to reach your goal. And you're just going to be getting laurels, which is nice and cute, but it didn't get you a meeting, right?
Correct.
For the bigger contests, you know, the ones that everybody knows, the Nichols and things like that, if you place in those competitions, then now that is something that you can use as leverage to possibly get a manager. I wouldn't necessarily say an agent, because agents usually jump in when it's time to spend some money, you know, when it's time,
Yeah.
you know, contract time, but it
Yeah.
might help you to get a manager. It might help you to get a producer or someone interested, you know, that can maybe then take you to the next level of, you know, a development deal or something. And so you would just query them, query the people who you think are best fit for you and your story. And in that query, it's literally, hi, my name is, and I just placed in this competition. I'd really like X from you, whether that is, I'm looking for representation, or I'm trying to see if you would be interested in developing my script, if it's a producer, or buying or selling or whatever. And then you give them the log line and that's it. Don't attach anything, don't send them anything else. If they're interested, they will respond and say, yes, send me the script and I'll read it. So that's one of the best ways to capitalize on those larger screenplay competitions. But in general, I always say to people, if you're looking for an extra $50, then apply to any competition that's going to give you some money if you win. But if you're looking for access, then you need to be paying attention to if you're going to get a meeting, if you're a finalist, if you're going to get, you know, some email back and forths or connections, or some kind of communication with someone. There are some competitions like Film Pipeline, which will actually give you a conversation with their development person to see what else they could have in store for you. But that's the only way you're going to get the access, is if they promise it to you. And if not, then you kind of have to utilize your, you have to do it yourself and kind of reach out to people and say, hey, I placed in this, you know, are you interested in reading my screenplay?
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, because to dovetail, the second part of the question is, like you said, some of the contests would specify if you placed in the top 10, which I did, then they will submit your work, or at least the log line, to potential managers, and there's production companies listed. So my second question, sorry, thanks so much, is should I follow up with them? Because I haven't heard anything yet, but it's like some of these are recent announcements. What do you think? Thank you very much.
How long has it been?
A couple of weeks now.
I'd give them some time.
Yeah.
Also, there should be someone who you can communicate with directly, who you can kind of ask about a timeline, because I don't know, you know, how long it took them to actually send the information out. Let's say they sent it to 50 places. LA in general is not in a rush to get back to anyone, right?
Yeah.
So some of those people may not have even opened the email yet to know that there's a log line for them to read. And then if you're waiting on those individuals to get back to you, who you don't have access to, direct access to, then you'll just be waiting. So, you know, I would say if there's a coordinator or someone, give them some couple of more weeks, you know, and maybe contact that person and say, you know, so what are the next steps and what should we expect back? Because maybe they've done their part and they've already sent it out, and now it's just up to those people to respond. And in LA, a lot of people don't respond. They won't even say, hey, I received your log line. They won't say anything unless they actually want to have a conversation with you. So it's a lot of hurry up and wait.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Do you have anything to say, Max?
No, I mean, I agree with Shannon. It's all,
cool.
You know, I mean, you take the wins as validation that you're doing something right, and just keep writing more screenplays. I know it's sometimes the last thing writers want to hear, but you know, your next one's going to probably be a little better. The next one might be a little bit better than that. You have to use it as steam to power that engine. It's really the best way to look at contests. And if you start getting notoriety because of them, great. But I feel like that's almost like a bonus.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Max. Really appreciate your time.
All right. No thanks, Jay. Yassine is asking, so I wrote a pilot script for a TV series about an African slave becoming immortal in the early 1800s and fighting against the injustice facing the Black community through the centuries as a vigilante, and people having been asking about who is the antagonist in the series. So my question is, does the antagonist have to be an actual person, or can it be, in this case, the system designed to keep the Black man down? This is the antagonist.
Yes, I actually have a YouTube video that's going to go up in a couple of weeks. That, you know, an antagonist doesn't have to be a person. An antagonist can be a person. It can be an entity like the government, or it could be the natural forces, you know, of the world. Like if you're watching Fifth Wave, you know what I mean? There isn't a person that's causing all of the problems. It's the earth, right? So no, it doesn't have to be a person. However, a lot of people do like for the antagonist to be personified, you know, someone who represents that antagonistic force. So if it is society, if it is the government, if it is the man, and if you're getting this note from people who you're trying to sell to, take the note that they're saying to you, they want a personified antagonist, and then figure out how, or you know, how you can incorporate that into your series and who that is. The thing about television series is, you know, sometimes there isn't a clear and consistent antagonist because the story is changing over time. So you might have one antagonist in this season, and in the next season it's a different antagonist. You know what I mean? There may be no antagonist for 3 full episodes because they're dealing with one particular problem, and the next thing you know, middle of the season, boom, antagonist comes in. So I don't know if you're at, I know you said you wrote the pilot, but I don't know if you're at the pitching point where you're talking about the full series or you're talking about the full season, but maybe they're asking you, or maybe they're saying that your protagonist isn't coming up against enough complication. There isn't enough conflict, and there needs to be someone who's on the other side thematically, or someone who's just on the other side of what that person wants. You know, their goals are what's conflicting. And so I would just say, take the note and try to figure out how you can personify that within your screenplay.
Yeah, great. Let's go to the next one. Michael Graff, isn't your voice implicit in the subject matter you pick to write? In a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, but there are some people who actually do enjoy different genres, right? So then maybe your voice then comes into theme, because I even say when people like to write in different genres, they're usually still writing about the same stuff, you know, or the same kind of character. They're just putting them in this, you know, different situation. So sure, but I think kind of what we said earlier, your voice is more about you and how you show up on the page in the stories that you're telling, no matter what genre it is. So even if someone reads my sci-fi, you know, feature, and then they read my 1-hour drama pilot that's like a family drama, something about it still says that Shannan wrote it. So that's kind of, you know, my best way of talking about voice, but I don't necessarily think it's implicit to the subject matter, unless you mean tone and subject matter, you know, yeah. But again, you can decide to take something that's a serious subject matter and flip it on its head and make it a dark comedy, you know, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, because, you know, Judd Apatow works within the same type of movie. So yes, but then, yeah, maybe subject matter, Michael, wasn't the best term, because, you know, subject matter in Knocked Up versus The Big Sick, not the same, but necessarily it's about love, you know, so it's kind of but I know what you're saying is that the types of projects I choose to work on will also help define who I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anonymous says, if you have, this is a big question. So I don't know if we're gonna have time to really dive into all this, but it's a big question asked in a very short sentence. If you have a lot of story ideas for a script, how do you decide what to keep and what to cut?
Well, that if you have a lot of story ideas, it means you don't yet have a story.
Yeah.
Ideas are elements, right? And so what I tell my clients often is you have more than one script you can write. It doesn't all have to go in this one script. It's the same thing I say for a pilot. You have a whole series. You don't have to put everything in the pilot. So you need to go back to your outline stage, or whatever it is your development process is, because not everybody likes to outline, and figure out what is the story. If you know what the story is, then you know what steps, what plot points, what emotional through line is necessary to get your character from A to B to C. If you don't, then you'll just be thinking, all of these are great ideas, right? But you got to figure out what's the story, and then take something that's a great idea, put it to the side, because maybe another story lives in that idea, which is another script.
Yeah. Yeah. I would just suggest start from character, really. I mean, it's tough not knowing what the story ideas that you have, but start from character and then just beat the hell out of that person. I hate saying it that way, but just make it as difficult as possible to achieve whatever that character wants, because through that process, they're going to realize what they need, and then you can put them within the right situation. Christy Daniels asks, do character-driven movies aim more at the older watchers and viewers, and plot driven more at the younger generation?
I don't think so. Maybe. I don't think so. I don't think Lady Bird was made for older audiences in particular, seeing as the protagonist was a young woman. Even if you think of eighth grade is definitely not necessarily made for older people, even though I, as an older person, watched it. But I also think it probably wasn't made for eighth graders either, because it's, it's a little dark for the, for particular viewers. But no, I don't necessarily think so. I think what I learned the other day from being on a webinar with Seed and Spark is all kinds of people watch all kinds of things. And, Hollywood, because we're a place that loves boxes, tries to put people in those boxes and say, well, people, in the flyover states would only watch this, and people here only watch this, and viewers who are 18 to 35, when really, if you sat in a room with your family, you'd be surprised at who was watching what, so I don't necessarily think that character driven goes one way and plot driven goes another. Yeah.
My parents, I walked downstairs one night and they were watching Hannibal. And I'm like, whoa. And I sat down, I hadn't watched it. And I watched a couple of scenes and I'm like, are you seriously watching? And it was dark, like it was ugly. But anyway, I did not expect my parents to watch that. Lee Norris asks, do you agree that the antagonist should not have an arc?
No, I don't agree with that, especially in 2021. We're no longer in the Jack Nicholson Joker days. We're in the Heath and Joaquin Joker days, which means we want, depending upon the film, because not every film is about the antagonist, but I always describe the antagonist as I always describe the protagonist as the antagonist, meaning if you decided to flip the perspectives, the antagonist could be our protagonist. It's just that we were introduced to the other guy first, and we were taught to relate to that person first. But the antagonist has reason for doing what he or she is doing. Most people do not just get up and say, you know what, I'm just going to antagonize you for no reason whatsoever. It's either because you want the same thing that I want, so we're in competition, or the thing that you want puts me in a bad place, so I want to stop you from doing that, or thematically, I'm on the other side. So we both want the same thing, but we want it in different ways. That's why I'm your antagonist. So if you make your antagonist a well-rounded and three-dimensional character, your story is going to be that much more impactful. Now, that doesn't mean that they have to change, but the same thing is true for your protagonist. Your protagonist doesn't have to change. We would love if they did, even if a little bit, but they don't have to. But I do think you have to make them three-dimensional. And in that, there may be an arc. But because it's not the antagonist story, we aren't necessarily looking for them to change so that we can feel better about them or anything like that. But that change, if they are going to change, they're only changing because it's going to affect what the protagonist is trying to do.
Yeah. I like to define the antagonist with different words to help me define who the character is per the genre, like opponent or villain or rival. Like villain is much more Disney movie or Die Hard, or, Ursula from Little Mermaid. Like it's villain, like it's just evil. That character is probably not going to change, but an opponent could be your mom, and that person might, learn by the end. A rival might be in a romantic comedy. And so there could be some adjustment, it just helps with the definition of word choice. Ed asks, you talk about creating the right character for the plot. What about going the other way? Yeah. So say you have what you think is a great character that you want to build the plot around. Totally.
Yep. Then I would say, I think one of us may have mentioned this earlier, but figure out who they are. One of the questions that I have my clients answer is, what's the worst thing that could happen to this person? Once you know who they are, you can't answer that question if you don't know who they are. For me, I'm afraid of water. What's the worst thing that can happen is that this room starts filling up with water. So guess what you have to do? Fill my room up with water, right? So if you've started with character and you have someone who's really interesting, who you know really well, but you're trying to figure out what their story is, figure out what it is they want, what they have to have, what they need, and what's the worst thing that could happen to them or what's the worst thing that could happen if they don't get the thing that they want or need, and then fill it up from there.
Right. One of my projects was developed that way. It was really just kind of a test to see if I could come up with an idea. And I said, okay, I'm going to put myself as the main character, but I'm going to exaggerate basically everything about me from a personality level. And so I created a really risk-averse character who was just totally romantically hopeless, and I just piled it on. And then I thought, well, what would be the worst thing that would happen? He falls in love with his extreme sports tour guide. And then I had this character that was doing everything that he would never imagine to do: whitewater, river rafting, parachuting from plane. He was just terrified the whole time. But he's also a history nerd. And the tour guide actually believed that they were going to find something at the end of this tour. And so it was totally, plot was formed around just the type of character that you sketch. Yeah.
Yeah, because even with that, like we said, trying to find the best plot for a character, you may also realize this is the worst character for this. And that could make it a comedy, right? Because now we have to watch this person be terrible at whatever it is they're trying to do until they learn it. Or it's the drama of maybe he's not gonna make it, but we're gonna watch him train, and we're gonna learn about his heart, and we're still gonna root for him. And he does eventually, do something. It isn't what he went to accomplish, but he does accomplish something. And it's okay that he didn't have the skill set. He's the worst person for this situation, but because of that, we loved him that much more.
Right. That's good. I really like that Eagle. All right. Anonymous is asking, how does it work for circulating your script on Twitter? Do you share the link to the PDF? Seems like you would want to protect it more.
Yeah, you don't share the script. Again, going on Twitter is about looking for people who are open to reading, and they'll probably say, send me your log line. Whether you're doing log lines, on Twitter, or you're doing it in their DM, it would be the same thing. You send the log line, they say, send me the script. Obviously, before you send out anything, it should be copied. You should get it copyrighted. And then they'll probably give you their email address and have you send it to them. I don't use Twitter enough to know if you can attach anything to a DM, maybe, but I haven't the slightest idea. But also, depending upon who you're sharing with, they may have you, sign some papers that indemnifies. Hopefully I'm using the right word, but if you're going to be reading, if they're going to be reading your stuff, they want to make sure you're not going to come back and try to sue them later because they read it.
Sign,
yeah.
We're going to do 3 more questions plus one that's straightforward from Monica. She's saying, Shannan, when is that workshop about introducing a protagonist?
I hope I'm telling you correctly, Monica, but it's either March 7th or March 14th. I'm going to start publicizing for it the first week of March. So you can look at my Instagram page or go to my website and it'll be up.
And your website's what again? My
website is awriterforyourwriter.com. awriterforyourwriter.com.
Cool. Okay.
All
right. Another anonymous. What advice would you say to writers writing experiences of people other than their own experiences, like men writing women characters, white people writing Black characters?
Yeah, I think it's gonna be about you doing the research like anything else, right? Whether that means you're reading books about these people's experiences, or you're reading books from their point of view. It's also about diversifying your circle, you know what I mean? Having people that you trust who can read it and give you their point of view. I actually have someone who is sending me a screenplay because it's about Black characters and he isn't Black, and he wants my opinion on how he wrote his Black characters because he wants to make sure that they're natural, etc. So be open to talking to people, because at the end of the day, we can think we know someone's experience, but we're only taking in really what society is telling us their experience is. So it's really hard to separate the two a lot. So you need to have conversations with people and be willing to have, again, trusted people read and give you feedback so that you can make sure that you're speaking in their voices correctly. But it's totally possible. I'm not a person who believes that you have to be living that experience in order to write it. You just need to be a researcher. That's part of our job.
Okay, great. Monica is asking, I'm mapping out my outline for a feature, and I'm looking for a development executive to give me notes, as I don't want to write the screenplay if there are flaws I can fix in the outline. Can you recommend someone to review this? As I
That's
don't
what
see
script
any.
consultants do.
Right. Yeah, you
So,
don't need the development executive yet.
no, the development executive is not going to read it and give you notes. They don't do that unless they've purchased it, and then they'll do lots and lots and lots of notes with you. But if you're looking for someone to say, hey, am I even going in the right direction before I start getting this thing on page, that's what we're here for. So you'll be looking for a script consultant.
Yeah. Or, I mean, if you a writer's group, or, you know, if you can't afford to pay somebody, try to find a peer of some kind who isn't going to BS you and just kind of pat you on the back, and, you know, they actually know what they're doing.
Yeah.
All right, we'll do a couple more just because we had a couple quick answers there. So Matthew, how do we keep screen theories, structure, plot, etc., from getting in the way of just writing?
For me, they're all in the same. They are the writing. So, you know, the elements, the structure, the plot, again, it's about knowing the rules so that you can break them. You know, there are plenty of filmmakers who don't write in the box that Hollywood put them in. They also probably took a while to become really famous because they weren't writing in that box. You know, Spike Lee just got an Oscar, and it was for co-writing a film. It's not even for his direction. You know what I mean? But that's because he said, this is the way I want to do it, and I'm going to do it that way. But for me, structure should feel natural. No matter what, your first act is setting up why we're here. And it's explaining to me this thing crashed into someone's life, and now you're going to watch them figure out how to get out of it, whatever that thing is. And act 2 is going to be the physical trying to get out of it or get into it or whatever they're trying to do. And act 3 is going to be how we resolve. that's natural. So I don't think you can separate that, and nor should it stand in the way of your writing. It should be a natural progression. Even if you read bedtime stories to your children, they're setups, the people get into something, and then they resolve. That's what storytelling is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in a way you can't avoid it because story just is that way. I watched a movie on Netflix the other night called The Dig with Carey Mulligan and Lily James and Ray Fiennes. And it was just a really nice movie, not the typical type of movie you'd see nowadays. It was actually kind of refreshing to see that somebody would make a movie like that. But it didn't really follow that typical structure. They introduced some storylines really late. It was really slow. I paused it at one point thinking, all right, where are we here in terms of a timestamp? And I'm like, oh my God, we have like an hour and a half left. So it was slow, but it was still enjoyable. You're still going to be able to get through it, but you have to understand why you're doing it that way.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people are going to be like, well, that doesn't make sense, you know. And if you can explain yourself, then you know, but it's hard to, you shouldn't have to explain yourself.
And if you're working with someone who knows story well enough, like we do, I'm not going to be a stickler about needing to get to the inciting incident by page 15 if what I'm reading feels necessary.
Yeah.
If it doesn't feel necessary and the pacing feels too slow and I'm not even interested, then I'm going to say, you have to speed this up. I need to know why I'm here. I don't know what I'm tracking. But there are some people who understand I needed that much setup, and therefore I'm able to go along with it, you know?
Yeah. Sometimes the character introductions are so much fun that we're like, okay, we'll sit in it for a while. Yeah. Like when Harry Met Sally, when they slept together, which is technically their midpoint complication, whatever you want to call it, it was late. It was probably page 70. And then they had a really short latter half of the second act. And the third act was like 4 scenes. So you don't have to follow it perfectly as long as it's engaging and entertaining along the way. Back to the Future, I don't even know if I could name the midpoint because everything's a complication. So anyway, we're reiterating.
In Molly's Game, they spend 10 minutes just on voiceover and an introduction when she's about to do her last ski. Maybe it's not 10 minutes, but it's like 10 pages in the screenplay.
Yeah.
But it
and Molly's Game but it was a constant churn of energy and tension and oh my God, and then flashbacks and what, you know, isn't Sorkin do that? I think Sorkin, he kind of knows what he's doing. Okay, generally speaking, in your opinion, is an outline or treatment absolutely necessary before writing a feature screenplay? So I think we might need to define the difference between outline and treatment. Yeah, so for me, I look at the outline as your expanded beat sheet. So your outline should have more than this is thing needs to happen, that thing needs to happen, but it's kind of like looking at what the scenes are and really being able to connect the dots between them. And that can be as long or as short of a document as you need it to be. To me, a treatment is a part of, unless you as a person
like it as a part of your process. You want to write the story out in prose for yourself. I look at the treatment as a part of your pitch documents only if somebody asked you for one. A lot of people get stuck in the treatment place because they're trying to make their screenplay fit into prose, which is not necessarily the easiest thing to do, but it's not necessarily something that you have to do. But if it's part of your process and you'd rather do it that way than to do it in an outline, then by all means, I think everybody needs to figure out their own process. What works for me may not work for you, but you do need a process. Going straight to the white page can oftentimes be hard. Even if you get the first 30 pages out really well, at some point, you're gonna get stuck because you haven't figured out where it's going. It's kind of like Google Maps. We get the Google Maps so that we can follow them and we don't get lost instead of just getting on the road. And I can't just drive to Arkansas from Los Angeles and think I'm not going to get lost, right? I need something that can tell me where I'm going. So that's how I look at your outlines and treatments if you choose to write them. If not, then I would say, if you don't feel like you need a treatment for your own process, I would wait until my screenplay is written and somebody asks me for one, because now you know your story and you can more easily put it in a quick, short, concise prose form so that you can send it out to the people who are requesting it.
Yeah. Yeah, the part of the question that says absolutely necessary, that's the tricky part, because I mean, the answer is no, of course it's not absolutely necessary. But the problem with going right to pages, like you were talking about, Shannan, is that even if you get through the draft and you call it your vomit draft, it's so much easier, and I see it all the time, and I've done it myself, you start falling in love with shitty material. Like, it's not the best version of what the script could be.
Yeah.
And then it's really hard to rewrite that. You're like, oh, I love this sequence of scenes, and tough. Sorry.
Necessary. You know? There's more vomit than necessary. Like, your first draft is always going to be a vomit draft. But if you didn't have a plan before, the cleanup is far bigger than it would be if you had a plan.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's a good way to end it there, everybody. I mean, I think preparing, spending time in workshops and classes and with writing groups and, you know, jumping into panels like this, you're all doing the right thing, you know, and we're all at different levels. Some have more experience than others. And, you know, education, obviously my title at the ISA is the Director of Education. So I'm going to be touting education. But I think in a weird way, and Shannan, you probably agree with me, it's kind of crazy that we have to push education on screenwriters.
Yeah.
Every single actor that comes to Los Angeles, first day, they have to take an acting class. Like, they just know they're supposed to do that.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, writers think they don't necessarily need to do that. And it doesn't mean you need to spend tens of thousands of dollars on consulting and everything, but you need to be teaching yourself something. You have to be reading, at the very least, reading scripts, a lot of them. Actors read more scripts than writers do, which is silly.
And I say it like this. If I woke up at age almost 40 and said, I'm going to go walk on to the NFL, everyone would look at me like I was absolutely crazy. Yet people wake up and say, I'm a screenwriter. There are still muscles you have to build. There are still skills you have to learn. And there should be a respect for the craft to want to hone it just as much as we respect those athletes who go out on that field. Yeah. And for whatever reason, because it's the arts, we just don't necessarily look at it that way. But anytime I compare it to sports, then people kind of have an aha moment, like, oh, well, that makes sense.
Yeah. And I always laugh when I go off on a tangent here. I'm a big sports fan, and, you know, and I'm sitting down on my couch with potato chips on my chest, and I'm like, you suck. You know, it's ridiculous to be judging a professional athlete. And we shouldn't necessarily be doing that in the arts either. If we see a movie that we didn't like, it's inappropriate to say, that movie sucked. Well, I mean, let's really think about it. There were a lot of hands that came into play, you know. What'd you say?
Somebody liked it.
Somebody said yes to it, and somebody gave them money, and they made it. And you know, it's maddening sometimes where I'm like, God, who put money into that? There's a reason, you know. And so we really can't be too judgmental, because you might very well be in that position someday. So like you said, respect the craft, and you are by joining us in these panels. But so anyway, thank you everybody for joining us.